Hello, fellow travelers, and welcome to Versus Stars podcast. All my loyal listeners, thank you for continued support. And remember, click the subscribe button, everybody. It's an amazing episode because David Hazan and Alex Moore boards the mothership. They are their team behind Death Drop Drag Assassin. Come aboard as we go traversing the stars. Hello, David and Alex. Thanks for coming to Versus Stars podcast.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Totally my pleasure. So I always start off with a question of inspiration to inspire your love for comics and who your earliest influences.
Well, for me, it was a pair of dear colleagues who got sick of me talking about adaptations of comics media without having read the source material and started shoving books in my hands. And the first book they shoved in my hands was Batwoman Elegy. And I tumbled down the rabbit hole pretty fast with that one. And I've been in love with comics ever since.
Alex?
Yeah, for me, I think my dad got me hooked on like the Tintin books at a very impressionable young age. And there was something about just sort of like sequential storytelling that was like, oh my God, I love this. And since then, I don't know, it's been a sort of like dipping in and out. So sort of like when I was quite young, I had a friend who then showed me all this like Joe Mad stuff at Marvel when he was doing X-Men and like Spawn and stuff, which was very different to sort of like Boys Reporters sort of wholesome adventures around the globe. Yeah, and then I think it was like the Black Sad books that really got me back into comics, because they're just like so cinematic and just this like absolute masterclass in storytelling. And since then it's just sort of keeping a toe in, because I don't know, the thing about when you start drawing comics is it doesn't leave an awful lot of time to read them, but
Absolutely.
So what created the creation of Death Drop Drag Assassin?
Just a coalescing of a lot of things, really. On my end, I was watching Jessica Jones, reading Steve Orlando's Midnighter, and just sort of at the peak of my drag race fandom, I guess. And all of those things kind of just went into a big ideas melting pot in my brain. And Death Drop leaped out at me. It's kind of hard to pinpoint sort of like one inspiration. It just was like a coalescence of a lot of things at the one time, that birthed this sort of queer noir with a supernatural hint to it, in my head.
So what was it about the concept that was really interesting for you?
I think to me, I wanted to do something that wasn't queer heroes punching homophobes. I think we've seen a lot of that. Some of it really great. And I just wanted to do something that sort of, I guess, cut against that a little bit. And did something that wasn't sort of mass produced for a wider audience, something that I wanted to read, something that I felt would resonate with the queer readers, and if it also resonated with other people, that would be great as well.
So when you're developing the concept, what aspect of it came first? So I know, like you said, you're written for interest of a queer audience at the same time you're looking for a mass audience as well. So how was that? How did you balance that approach?
I think the sort of the retired assassin trope, which has been really popular of recent years, popular, along the history of comic books, but recently it's just like John Wick has been such a huge thing. So I really wanted to lean on that, and I found that it was kind of a great vehicle to take apart internalized homophobia and sort of the way the homophobic systems of the world can infect the mind. And just that idea of a lingering presence of this assassin mentor that's sort of haunting you while you're trying to escape it was just such a great sort of fictional delivery system for some of those ideas.
So, Alex, did you already have a partnership set up with David in the past? What was it about this project you thought to yourself, yeah, I want to give this one a shot?
No, actually. So David emailed me out the blue. I think it was off the back of because I'd done a variant cover for David Buha's Killer Queen series, which is very different from this in tone. It's sort of very bright, campy fun. But I think David had like seen that and got in touch. They'd had to like pull out because they had like two other books come in, I think, just before the contract was about to be signed. So they went on to do sort of Quest Aside and The Gimmick, which both look incredible, and I want to go and check out as soon as I can. But yeah, it was like the initial pitch where it just was sort of like, I don't know, it was these two very sort of like, because you see when you sort of see like drag queen crime noir, you kind of think, oh, maybe this is going to be something that leans into the sort of like campy, fun, bright, colorful. But then I was looking at Nottingham, which is David's other series, and sort of like actually reading a bit more about it, what it was about, where it was sort of, sort of like looking at sort of like internalized like homophobia. And these sort of like actually much, I don't know, it's a much sort of like slightly more nuanced examination of sort of like the queer community and sort of like the issues that exist within it in a way. And I don't know, that sort of really grabbed me because yeah, I think there can be a tendency to lean to sort in media to sort of like I mean, I think it's great that there are all these stories about sort of like queer joy and things like that, but I think I don't know how true. I don't know. You talk to a lot of like queer people, and there's like a lot of mental health stuff going on. So I don't know. It's not all great. And I don't know. I think as we've been sort of working on the project, as time has gone on, like obviously all this stuff in sort of like politics has been kicking off with sort of like like book bans and sort of like dragging and banning like these like drag queen story time things and stuff like that. That I don't know, it's kind of felt increasingly, I don't know, like something that needs to be told. I don't know. Yeah.
So was it difficult for you to adapt your artistic style for this particular book?
Um, I don't think I just sort of like went into it because I think when I read like the initial first like this story is very twisty and I think I went in thinking it was maybe like slightly lighter in tone than it is. But actually, I think we've been talking about this, and it's something we quite like because it's sort of these very like I think I don't know. My style is a bit sort of like cartoony, but maybe that's not something you typically expect when you go into something that's maybe like quite so dark. So it's a quite sort of nice juxtaposition that then sort of like lulls you into this actually like quite gritty story.
So when you're thinking about it from an artistic standpoint, was there an idea first or an image that he discussed or whatever that kind of honed you in on what your style was going to be for this book? Was there like what was like that first part that you kind of latched onto and said, got it, this is what it needs to look like?
I mean, I think in terms of style, like the way I mean, I say this and actually like I can lean more cartoony and I can lean more sort of like realistic. So obviously it was like, okay, we're not going down the sort of like we're going in like more realistic. But I think the thing that I immediately jumped on was sort of like, oh, this is like a neon noir. So that's gonna be like really fun to play around with the colors because like color is such an evocative storytelling tool. And obviously you think of like neon noir today and you've got people like the guy who does Drive and all those films and how they can like sort of really lean into like color. And you've got like slick wet streets with like neon lighting and things like that. So that like aesthetics like that were sort of things I really wanted to like play with.
So with your partnership, how does it work? I mean, are you going full script? How much information do you add to it? How much are you letting freedom for Alex? How does this work?
I always work with full script. I scared that an artist will reach through the internet and slap me a few times if I don't. Um, but I think that I'm not super prescriptive. Sometimes I like to tell you what I think should be on the page. But then if Alex just wants to do something entirely different, um, they will probably ask for a sense check from me, and then I will just probably say this looks great. Sometimes I'll have a few little tweaks, but uh, I only give notes from a story perspective, so you know, I think our sort of as a partnership, ours works pretty well. My scripts, I feel I try to communicate like emotion and the vibe of what I want to see, and leave as much as I can to Alex to capitalize on that.
So now, when you find out that Alex is working on the project, and what does it allow you to do as a writer when you know you have an artist like Alex doing the visuals for you?
Um, I think that Alex thinks about the comic book page in a different way to myself. My brain very much works as a comics in boxes sort of thing, whereas they love to really, and I don't want to speak for you, Alex, but
No, it's
uh,
true.
you love to really play with the layouts, and there tend to be pretty non-traditional layouts that you use. So I just enjoy letting you watching you do your thing, really.
So the book is being published by Scout, is that correct?
That's
Yep.
correct.
So why is Scott the right publisher for the series?
We wanted sort of a lot of creative freedom, and Scout has really delivered that in spades. They really let us do our thing. They don't interfere too much, which for a book like this was incredibly important to me. So
So the series focuses on a character named Death Drop. So what is motivating Death Drop?
I think Death Drop is sort of motivated by uh, trying to hide from her past. Um, and she really, the story really forces her in a direction where she can no longer ignore or hide from it, and she has to actually metabolize the things that have happened to her um, in order to do what she needs to do to help the people she loves.
So Alex, so from a visuals perspective, what was your take on Death Drop? What how did you kind of develop her visually? Or sorry, or they, sorry if I'm using the wrong pronouns, my apologies.
Um, so I think when David sort of sent over like the initial pages for like issue one, there was also, because obviously we need to like develop the characters and things like that. There'd be sort of like descriptions of sort of like drag queens to maybe look at for inspiration, but I think in particular with Deathstrop, it was more sort of like what's her name? Angelina Jolie and Salt, as a sort of like
Yeah, I think
starting
that was it.
point. Yeah. So it was just sort of like, okay, how do we sort of like maybe take that look and sort of like translate it into like filter it through drag. And at the same time, I don't know, something that was sort of in the back of my mind with this was sort of like, oh, this is like crime noir. It would be fun if sort of like a lot of the aesthetics was sort of like harken back to like a traditional like crime noir. So there's a lot of sort of like more vintage retro sort of like Americana. So obviously there's like big raincoats, and sort of like slight like art deco-y sort of like flares to sort of things like the club and like one of the other characters sort of like costumes as well. Yeah, so it was just sort of like trying to mix all those different things together. to come up with something that was fun and maybe not too terrible to draw over and over again. But then immediately there's a character in issue 1 who's got like this sort of like metal, almost like feather thing, and it was just like, oh no, this is gonna be I'm gonna fucking hate this. So but fortunately that look does not come back in issue 2. So
intentionally that look doesn't come back in issue 2, I think.
No, but then I think in the next issue she's wearing a dress with like lots of little squares on it, and then it's like, oh no, now I've got to like quanta these to the button, so it doesn't work. There's always like something, but like I don't learn from my mistakes or very intentional design choices. Yes.
So you have Death Drop. What is Death Drop's relationship with Mother Henny? And can you tell me a little bit about Mother Henny?
Yeah, so Mother Henny is Death Drop's drag mother. I really desperately wanted to embody a lot of the queer platonic friendships in my life. And Death Drop and Mother Henny sort of do have a romantic history, but it doesn't kind of rule their present too much. And I just really wanted to reflect the kinds of queer platonic friendships that I've had in real life, that I think are valuable and important. Some of them are really like strong mentoring relationships that I don't really think that get represented in mainstream media a lot. So there's a lot of that going on, and yeah, I'm excited to see people really explore that dynamic because I write a lot of really bleak stuff otherwise. And so it was nice to write characters who really, love and care for each other. Um, Especially compared to some of my previous work.
So what do you mean by drag mother?
Drag mother is a concept in the drag community. And it's kind of how drag knowledge is passed on. It's a generational thing, right? And where the drag mothers will basically teach their drag daughters how to do drag, and bring them into the community.
Okay, see, I learned something, so I didn't actually know. So Death Drop it comes out during Pride Month. Now, was that the intention? Always going to be the release period for the first issue? How did that come about?
That's what we were really angling for. We've been working on this for quite a bit. Me longer than Alex, obviously, but I think it was important for us to try and to get as many eyes on this thing as we possibly could. And so obviously June is the best delivery system for that. And I hope it's the right book at the right time.
So, I mean, I'm sure this is kind of a general question, but I'm going to ask anyway. So, why is it important to increase representation of queer characters in comics? What is the importance of representation in media from a societal or individual standpoint?
I'm going to take that from an individual standpoint. When I talked about how Batwoman Elegy got me into comics, it really made me fall in love with comics, and part of that was the fact that you had a queer Jewish superhero, and as a queer Jew, the book resonated with me so much that it made me fall in love with not just the character, not just the creators, but the world of comic book storytelling. And I wouldn't have a career without that representation. So I mean, I owe everything to it. And I feel like that feeling that I got reading that book is the kind of thing that I've been kind of chasing, giving to others as part of creating comic books. So,
Alex, you want to add to it?
Yeah, and I think it's just important that it's sort of like, I don't know, I feel like the more stories that are out there that maybe aren't from a sort of like the sort of like mainstream minority view, then the more different types of stories you get to tell in those genres. So it's not just sort of like the quite rote, it's just a coming out story. You get to sort of like, the more there is, the more you can dive into sort of like the nuances of like an experience of any sort of like marginalized group. So then you get such like a much richer base of stories that obviously like more people can relate to in different ways, and it's not like you're just sort of seeing the same thing over and over again. So I just think, like, I don't know, the more platforms you give to people to sort of like explore different things, like the better for everyone. And I don't know, I think yeah, and also it can be like a great sort of like learning tool for other people. Like, I don't know, let's take something like Everything Everywhere All at Once. I'm not like a first generation Chinese immigrant, but I can like I don't know, there was like, I got completely emotionally involved in that story and sort of like took a load away from it. And I don't think it's just sort of like, oh, you can only see stuff that sort of like talks to your experience. So I don't know, I hope sort of like, people from outside the queer community are reading this as well, and it's sort of like, or maybe they like come in and find something and it's sort of like, oh yeah.
So is it difficult to balance entertainment with the important messaging?
Yes and no. Not to give you a non-committal answer, but I think the entertainment value of the story always has to come first. Um, and it is important to nail down theme because you sort of build all of those other elements around it. And it's the heart of the story, but at the end of the day, you gotta it's a story. It's not a PSA, right? So the story is as much a delivery system for entertainment as it is for, a message.
So in the series, Deathstroke finds a trail of corpses robbed of their faces. So is this crime intentionally allegorical?
Somewhat. I think really thematically, it's talking about identity. Um, and I kind of wanted the sort of the tenor of these disappearances to be a little spooky in nature. Um, and it's really to kind of, I guess, amplify that feeling of anxiety that's described in the first couple of issues. And really, there's a lot of sort of overlapping feelings in that. Uh, we've got obviously an epidemic of uh, trans people, specifically trans women being of color being murdered on the streets and nobody really caring. Um, you've got a character who may or may not have been disappeared during a hookup, which speaks to, I think, both the HIV epidemic still ongoing, really, um, and also speaks to several murders of gay men across the last sort of 50 years, who have been sort of lured with the prospect of a sexual encounter and have been instead treated pretty cruelly and brutally. And so there's just a lot of intersecting things that have kind of, uh, I've said this before, kind of really been drawn together into this idea of people being robbed of their identity and sense of self, by having their faces stolen.
So Alex, how much do you dive into the gore factor of all this?
um mm, I don't know. I mean, it's not, I don't know. It's not been, well, up until issue 4, like particularly gory. Um, but yeah. Oh gosh. I mean,
I
obviously,
think
like people are
I
getting punched and stuff like that, and you kind of like want it to have an impact. But I don't think the script like ever called for sort of like, yeah, and then their face got turned to mincemeat or something like that. I don't know. Sorry, you were
I
gonna
think
say,
I did
David.
tell you to. I think I did ask you to amp up the like how spooky the like face stealing element was.
Yeah, because obviously I'm just like reading the scripts as they come in, so it's sort of like, oh, actually there's like, yeah, visual notes that sort of like are going to relate to stuff that's going to happen in like visual later issues.
So
Yeah, no, that was a case of
So how gratuitous does the story get, and how concerned should you be about people knowing what your search looks like? Search history looks like looking up the material.
Oh, it's not that bad. I think just in terms of sort of like it's just blood. Blood and maybe some like DIY surgery, but it's not anything too like sort of like visceral, I don't think.
No. No. And I think a lot of that is abstracted as well. We're not going into too much detail. This is a mature reader's book. It does have some pretty confronting issues in it. But yeah, I think the gore is probably balanced on a fine edge in order to make sure that the story is being told in the way that it is intended.
So as Deathstroke searches for the killer, it reminds Deathstroke of the past with the mentor. How much exploration will readers get of the past, Deathstroke's past?
I think a good exploration, not so much as to sort of spoil things to come, things I plan in the future. But I'm not huge on exposition as a writer. I find that sort of drip feeding those things tends to work better, and it rather than being so close inside the character's head, I tend to not use inner monologue captions because I love a little mystery. And so I'm hoping you people are getting those little drip fed moments at the right time, and we've set them against the larger story so that they really seem relevant and important and meaningful. Yeah.
So how much is Deathstroke defined by the past, or is Deathstroke more defined by the past or the present?
I think when we start, Deathstroke is almost entirely defined by her past. And her present is kind of her method of hiding from her past. And she sort of is going to be driven to a breaking point in order to ensure that hopefully that she isn't defined by that past.
So how long is the series slated to run for?
We got 5 issues with Scout, and we'll see how that goes. And that's all I'm willing to say at this point.
Wait, okay. So just to clarify, are you saying this is an intended miniseries or a miniseries, but an ongoing if the sales are there?
It's intended as a mini series. I'd love to do more. It depends on everybody's availabilities, and there are definitely plot threads there to do more. So I'd love to get the chance to, and we'll see how we go.
So where and when can listeners find Deathstroke?
You can find Deathstroke at your local comic book store, or on good online comic book platforms from June 14th.
All right, David, Alex, it's been an absolute pleasure to talk with you guys, and hopefully the listeners pick up Deathstroke. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.